We're getting playoffs, and don't you dare complain about it. In the last couple of days, Formula One has already decided to lower the spending cap that was set to begin in the 2021 season due to coronavirus. The Cowboys look to be on the verge of caving into Dak, and subsequently also caving into their hopes of winning a Super Bowl anytime soon. And the Seahawks signed Carlos Hyde. But we do not have time for any of that, because midday Friday, the NHLPA voted to approve the proposed 24-team playoff to move forward with the NHL season. Although it was not quite unanimous, although I guess that was kind of to be expected anyway. And before we get too far in, it is fair to mention that no, we did not get a date or any kind of timeline as to when these playoffs might start, but it is a significant first step in getting to that point. The proposed system would include the top 12 teams from each conference based on the percentage of points that they earned during the games they played before the shutdown started. The top 4 teams from each conference, as determined using that same system, would get a first round bye, while the other 8 would match up to play what is currently a 5-game play-in series. And just to make sure that those top few teams aren't at any kind of disadvantage to the ones that are getting to play that 5-game series and knock off some of the rust, they will get to play a mini 3-game tournament amongst themselves. But it does still seem unclear whether or not they've decided if that little mini tournament is going to have any kind of bearing on the seeding of those top 4 teams. And while we still haven't heard any official word as to whether or not they're going to play any more regular season games, at this point I would very, very much doubt that we will see any more regular season, so I think for the teams that aren't in this bracket, the season is over. Even outside of the fact that it would be an absolute logistical nightmare in order to schedule and play the rest of the regular season, it also would seem pretty unfair for them to ask the players of the teams that are well outside of playoff contention, even with a 24-team playoff, to show up and risk exposure in order to finish off the season. On top of that though, to me, it always seemed like this idea of a 24-team playoff with the play-in round like what just got approved was always kind of more the NHL's plan B if they felt like they couldn't make the rest of the regular season happen. Using those extra 8 slots and a larger play-in round in order to kind of fix the issue of which teams might have made it and which teams might not have based on different amounts of games played. And yes, this does still suck for Buffalo, who is a little bit hung out to dry by this by being 3 points behind what is now the 12 seed in the Montreal Canadiens, despite having played 2 fewer games than them. But as it stands right now, the line in order to make these playoffs is set pretty evenly on both sides at the 500 win percentage level, or at least the NHL's much easier to achieve version of the 500 win percentage. A line that Buffalo managed to fall just under, so even if it is the Sabres, it's hard to feel too sorry for them. Also, while nothing has been confirmed on this front either, it does appear that the NHL will be going with a 2-hub city type of format as far as where the games will be played, putting the 12 Western Conference teams in one city and the 12 Eastern Conference teams in the other city. Which does make it seem a little bit more manageable anyway, especially when you consider that after 1 week, 4 of the teams from each of those cities will be leaving after having been knocked out in that play-in round. And as far as which cities, we also don't know a whole lot of concrete details about that either, but it seems like the leading candidates right now are Las Vegas and Edmonton. Edmonton would certainly seem to be one of the better options, especially considering they are one of the highest per capita testing cities in all of North America. Even outside of that though, it is a pretty well removed city and has relatively low population, at least compared to some of the other cities, and have had a very low infection rate, once again relative to the other cities. On top of that, it is certainly a colder climate, which would help ice conditions, especially with these games happening in July and also likely August. The only potential issues then with Edmonton would be any stricter Canadian rules, especially regarding a 2-week quarantine after potential exposure to the virus. And also potentially any issues with the closed border, although it doesn't really seem like they're too worried about that being a problem at this point. Meanwhile, Vegas definitely has plenty of empty hotel space for the players to stay in. I mean, heck, each team could probably even have their own hotel. And so again, while it still isn't confirmed that the regular season is over and that these will be the teams, assuming that we don't see any more regular season hockey, this is what the bracket will end up looking like. And I gotta say, just by looking at it, it's one that I would be pretty excited to see unfold. The bracket includes every single team from the Central Division and all but the Devils from the Metropolitan, so there is plenty of interdivisional rivalry hockey that we could get to see. Even if the first round, the only divisional rivalry that we do have is the Rangers versus the Canes. Because they also decided not to do any reseeding from round to round, it does open up some pretty interesting possibilities for the first real round of the playoffs. I mean, just to name a few, starting on the Western Conference side, an Oilers win in the play-in round would mean that we would get to see McDavid and Draisaitl go up against McKinnon in the first round of the actual playoffs. If the Coyotes were to upset the Preds, we would get a Battle of the Desert, and if the Wild were to beat the Canucks, we would get the Wild versus the Stars in the second round, which I would have to imagine would be pretty exciting to watch, especially for Wild fans. And on the Eastern side, again, although it would require an upset, a Florida win would mean that we would get to see for the first time the two Florida teams face off in the playoffs. And for staying in the same state, the Penguins winning would get us a Pennsylvania face-off between them and the Flyers. And if there's one fan base who very much does not like how this bracket looks, that would have to be the Maple Leafs, because if they were to beat the Blue Jackets in the first round, they would then have to go and face their demons in the form of the Bruins in the second round. To be fair though, when the announcement of a past vote was made on the proposal, Maple Leafs fans looking at this bracket were not the only ones that were letting out groans. There also seemed to be some complaints from other teams, especially a couple of the higher seeded teams and especially the Bruins. And first of all, to anybody complaining, I mean, are you kidding me? We've gone this long without sports and we finally have some signs that it's coming back and you want to complain about it? I mean, yes, I get it. You're bummed that you aren't going to get to play on home ice throughout the playoffs despite scoring 100 points through 70 games. But that's not going to be possible. And even if you were allowed to play on your own ice, there's not going to be fans in the stands either way, so what's really the point? Plus, it's not like the President's Trophy winning teams have fared all that well in the last few years. I mean, just look at what happened to the Lightning last year. And I would understand some of the complaints if they do decide to let that mini 3-game series affect the seeding for those top 4 teams, but as it stands right now, I don't see why you would complain. And sure, a lack of reseeding round to round could mean that a team like the Flyers as a 4 seed might end up facing the Canadiens as a 12 seed, while the Bruins might end up facing the 8-seeded Leafs. But again, if you're a 1-seeded team and you can't beat an 8 seed, especially one that you've proven you can beat over and over and over again in the playoffs, then you weren't going to win the whole thing anyway, so just stop. Outside of nitpicking the seeding and how the bracket is laid out, really the only complaining I've seen is people just being all up in arms about how 24 teams is too many for a playoff. To which again, really all I have to say is shut up. You're finally getting hockey back, and now you're gonna get more hockey, more playoff hockey. I mean, come on. And look, I get that there are a lot of people, myself even included, that don't like the idea of diluting the playoffs and what it means to get there by having a whole bunch of teams that really don't deserve to be there being a part of them. But you have to realize that this is the NHL doing their absolute best to come up with a fair enough system in a very hard and unprecedented situation. And before you go saying that the NHL doesn't care about it being more fair, they're just trying to get as much money out of this as they can, so what? They should be trying to get as much money out of this as they can. They're already going to miss out on all of the revenue that would have come from what was left of the regular season that now isn't going to happen at all, not to mention the ticket sales that they would have gotten from all the playoff games. And then on top of that, especially if they're going to want to find extra money in the budget in order to try and keep some of the junior hockey leagues alive that are struggling even more than they are, they're going to need all the money they can get. Really, in the end, there's only one complaint or apprehension that I've seen towards these new playoffs that I think has any real merit behind it at all. That, once again, coming from the group of people who do not like the idea of an ever-expanding playoff, and think that this may not be just a one-time band-aid for the NHL, and might be something that we could actually see in the future. I don't think it's much of a secret that there have for a while now, and well before any of us had any idea what a coronavirus even was, that there have been rumblings within upper circles even of the NHL of wanting a bigger playoff of 20 or even 24 teams like we're getting now. So do I think that this 24-team bracket is the NHL taking an opportunity to test out and see if a much larger playoff would actually work? Yeah, I absolutely do think that that's part of the reason for it. So if you really cannot stand the thought of an NHL playoffs bigger than 16 teams, then yeah, you might have a little bit of something to worry about in the future, but it still wouldn't be for a while. And to be honest, if that is you, I'm right there with you. I don't really like the idea of diluting the playoffs to a point where it doesn't really mean that much if you made it to them. It really only means something if you couldn't get to them. And sure, I guess at least for me, it does help a little bit if you just say that that first round is only a play-in round and not actually part of the playoffs, so only 16 teams really do make the playoffs. But it would be pretty frustrating if you are that first 5 seed that loses to a 12 seed, and then you really should have made the playoffs, but technically you didn't. And while, as I did talk about in a previous video, the NHL does have quite a bit of parity in their playoffs as far as which teams are winning and how far teams make it despite their seed. But at what point with hockey do you end up diluting the playoffs too much to where the first round doesn't really even matter, like in the NBA, where the top seeds are always going to win their games in the first round? So yes, as far as I'm concerned, while I do think it's a good idea for this year, I do hope that this 24-team playoff is just a one-time thing, and that the playoffs going forward don't ever go past 16 teams. But again, from a financial perspective, it's hard not to see why the NHL wouldn't consider this. More playoff hockey does mean quite a bit more money, and more fan bases that are invested in watching the games, once again, is more eyeballs and more money. And in the end, if that's what it takes for the NHL to help grow the game and make their product better, then it's probably worth it. For now though, I'm just very excited to finally see some major steps taken towards getting sports back, and especially towards getting to see some playoff hockey. Even if it probably won't be until early July before we actually get to see some games at the earliest. But that is all from me for now, so as always, if you did make it to this point, thank you for watching. If you did like this video, please do hit that thumbs up down there below. If you really liked it and want to see more, I will make sure to keep you updated as things progress, so hit that subscribe button down there below as well. And with still so much uncertainty, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section below on this year's 2014 playoff and the potential of more of it to come in the future. If nothing else though, I hope to see you next time and stay safe out there. Peace!